Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 79.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have a great episode. I interviewed Alexis Avila. He is a test prep expert, and we talked a lot about what families should be doing around test prep and test planning. So if you're a family and you're struggling with how often you should take the test and whether or not you should sign up for private tutoring or take a group class, you're just trying to figure out what your test strategy should be, this is a great interview for you to listen to. As always, we have show notes available at Taming the High Cost of College /79. This is our 79th episode. So without dragging things on any further, let's go ahead and jump into the interview with Alexis. All right, today we're sitting down with Alexis Avila. He's the owner of Prepped and Polish, a ACT and SAT tutor and preparation company. Welcome, Alexis.
Hi, how are you today, Brad?
I am doing great. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you come to get involved in tutoring and test prep, and what is it that you do specifically?
Well, I'm a licensed guidance counselor by training, pre-K through 12. And I actually worked in Wisconsin at Madison Memorial High School for one full year. And I really didn't like it, to be honest. I didn't feel like guidance counselors were actually counseling. Most of the time we're doing a lot of scheduling and, substitute teaching classes. So I fell into tutoring back in Boston, and, the business has taken off. But it's been 17 years of doing this. SAT and ACT is pretty much is in demand in the Boston area. So that's a lot of what I've been doing for 17 years, helping students improve their test scores. But as well as we do academic subject tutoring, and we always work with students one-to-one.
Okay, great. So then I guess you would be familiar. I guess the first question I want to talk about is the new SAT. The first opportunity to take it was just this past few weeks. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences now with the new SAT compared to the old, or compared to the ACT, or what's the word on the street, so to speak?
Well, the word on the street is they're a little bit more alike than they used to be. So the SATs has no guessing penalty now. That's kind of a biggie because, the last 50 years it's had a quarter-point deduction for questions answered incorrectly. And also, there is less answer choices to choose from. So there used to be 5, and now there's only 4, A, B, C, and D, for the new SAT. So, for the test anxiety-filled student, that's actually like a breath of fresh air. And then they reduced the sections from 10 to 5, and so it's a little bit more of a clear, more organized test in terms of the format of it. There used to be 10 sections, so it was kind of all over the place there. But the SAT has, they combine the grammar and the reading section into one juggernaut of a section called the writing /reading section. And they also scored it. It's also based on a score of 1600 again. They went back from a 2400 to 1600. And, as you know, in the Midwest area where you're based, the ACT is traditionally known as a more academic-oriented test. And the new SAT, they, in a way, better overlaps with the school curriculum. They got rid of like some of those sentence completions, a little bit less emphasis on the vocab, because, let's face it, you don't have like a vocabulary class in high school. So, and then a little bit more intensive on the reading. The new SAT you have more time per question. So basically you have more time to answer your questions than on an ACT. So pacing might be a little bit better on that SAT, but then again, there's more thinking involved on the new SAT because there's more inference related type questions on the SAT. ACT tends to be a little bit more of a straightforward Q&A type test. The math on the new SAT, pretty much the same types of topics tested on the ACT, but a little less trig, a little heavier on the algebra, The word problems are rooted in real life context. There's a one calculator section and a one no calculator section. There's an optional SAT essay now. It used to be mandatory to take the SAT essay. Now it's optional. And it also, the topic has changed. So it's asking you to critique an author's persuasive essay. And as I mentioned, there's no more sentence completion questions. They got rid of those. But, vocab's going to be important because there's approximately 2 questions per reading passage are word and context type questions.
Okay. So then based on the new SAT, what are you generally recommending for students that are trying to figure out which test and why? And, I think there's some confusion. Some families, I think, want to take them both and figure it out. Where do you stand on what should be doing as far as your test plan?
Look at what causes trouble for students with the ACT and then make a decision. So if your student really, really struggles with pacing, and, like, for example, the ACT reading and science questions, they give you more questions than time than you can chew. So a lot of students notoriously just don't, it's not that the science ACT section's hard. It's just that you don't have a lot of time to do those passages and answer the questions in the allotted time. So if pacing is really an issue, you might want to steer toward the redesign SAT. It gives you a little bit more time per question. And but also, the real practical thing to do is to analyze your PSAT score, or just take a practice SAT test from the official College Board study guide and compare those scores to the ACT practice test scores to make a good determination.
Okay, so one strategy would be to do a practice test of both types in some fashion, and then determine if one type of test is your thing. Is that simplifying it? Okay.
That's that seems to be the most practical way to do it.
Okay. So then how often are kids taking tests these days? For parents that are just rolling into the testing, are most kids taking it twice or 3 times or?
Yeah, they're taking it about, I would say 2.5 times if you were to average everything together. So I would say, definitely not 1, but kids usually do a retake. So they take it twice, but it's not uncommon for kids to take it 3. And then sometimes once in a while you have a student who's, like, say, applying for a hockey scholarship and needs to meet a certain score threshold. So he'll take it like 5 times.
Yeah. So I guess in practicality, we see different bogeys that people need, to expand on that. For things like the NCAA, you need to have a certain score on your tests in combination with your grades at school. So if your grades at school are nailed down and you can't change them much anymore because a lot of your freshman, sophomore, junior year is pretty much done, then you may focus on the test and try and get that higher so that you can qualify for the NCAA. So that's generally, relatively low scores. In ACT, you're shooting for 25s, 25s, 26s, something like that to be a good complement for your grades.
Definitely.
But then we also have kids at the high end that are saying, my target school or the target for my scholarships at my target school are ACT or SAT of X. And those numbers can be relatively high.
Yeah.
So what's a realistic, if you take a preliminary test or you take your first test and you come in at a certain score, what's the likelihood of increasing it, and about how much could you increase? Again, as an example, if you're saying, well, this school is going to require a 29 ACT to be in the running for a scholarship.
Right.
If my first shot, I got a 22. That seems insurmountable to me, but maybe I'm wrong. And so what do you think is, if a parent's kind of working with their student, what's a reasonable expectation for improving scores, with hard work or just taking it again? What's the difference, so to speak?
Well, there's so many variables involved because, if a kid comes to you like in the teens with a score like in the teens, perhaps he just didn't even try that time, and his potential really has all along been in the mid-20s. So you could be dealing with that kind of student, like kind of a lack of motivation maybe. In those cases, with maybe 20 hours of just prep, 10 weeks before the test, that kid could go up quite a bit. He could go up from a 22 to a 29. So it's totally achievable. It just depends on, did he put his full effort the first time around? Sometimes kids don't. They really just didn't practice, and they just kind of showed up and they didn't, they ran out of time, or they weren't really trying. So, but I would say pretty much like, expect like a 3 to 4 point jump with, a solid test prep plan, whether you do it at home or with a tutor or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And then let's
yeah.
translate to SAT then. What would that be in the scores of an SAT?
It would be about 200-point increase, on the new scale, 150 to 250 in that range. Obviously, if you start with, 750s per section, you can't go up 100 points per section because the cap is at 800.
Right.
But I'm just saying for like kind of if you're starting out like with a 500, you practice and you learn, test taking strategies. You can definitely, improve. We're talking probably 200 points or more.
Right.
I mean, I've had a student on the older SAT, which was based on a 2400 scale, improve 500 points on an SAT. So that's a little more rare.
Mm-hmm.
But he took it quite a few times, and he worked really hard in between each test. Took lots of practice tests.
Right.
In between.
Right. So I guess the point I'm making is there's reasonable expectations and there's, the outlier, and your student could be the outlier, but you really need to, I guess, gauge where you're at. If your student is trying really hard on the first 2 tries and they're going to go do it a third time, there's not as great a chance that they're suddenly going to jump a huge difference from the first 2 tries. On the flip side, if they started low and they didn't try, well, then there is some opportunity. But I think for a lot of families, figuring out what scores are reasonable for your student is part of the puzzle as far as how hard you want to work on the test scores, et cetera.
Yeah, and you figure out those baseline scores by taking a full practice test under time conditions on a Saturday morning. So, for example, one effective thing I do is I have my students come to my office on Saturday morning. We start at 9 o'clock sharp, come 5 minutes beforehand so we can start promptly at 9. And we have a proctor start and stop each section just like they would on test day. And then what we'll do is we'll take the scores, we'll score them, and then we will evaluate each section to analyze the pros and cons and what you need to work on. So if you do something like that, you'll get a lot of really good feedback on what your goals are.
Right. And there's a lot of high schools that will do mock tests for their students, and there's a lot of test prep companies, et cetera, that will help you with that.
And you can do it at home. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right. And mom or dad could run the stopwatch for junior at any point as well. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess let's talk a little bit about how much prep or how much effort we should be putting into testing as compared to all the other pieces of the puzzle that, people are concerned with in as we're moving into college. How much time or effort is a typical course?
We do 2-hour sessions once a week because students are really busy with other things. And we don't want to overwhelm them, but 2-hour session, sitting down, and working on drills, practice problems, and strategies. And then what we do is we assign about a 3-hour homework assignment to do in between those 2 hours. So that's about 5 hours of test prep a week.
All right. And then how many weeks would be a typical prep session? Would that be 10 weeks or 3 weeks before the test, or
10? I would say about 10 weeks for the average student is a good rule of thumb. Some students won't need 10, but often, you can get a lot done with 10, and there's a lot to cover, believe me.
Yes. I guess let's just get up on our soapbox here and talk a little bit about philosophy. I have a lot of parents ask me, well, why do we have to do all this prep? It doesn't seem to, make sense. And I guess the short answer that I tell parents is because your competition is doing it. Okay, what is your thoughts on that as far as, is it necessary? If it was your student, would you typically recommend it?
Yeah, a couple things. Well, obviously I'm biased because, I'm going to say, yeah, you should, get some test prep and try to do it with a tutor who is experienced and knowledgeable and can help instill confidence and strategy. So obviously I'm biased, but the thing is, right, yeah, your competition's doing it, especially around the Boston area. Everybody pretty much has a test prep tutor or someone helping them out. It's a little bit of an investment. Yes, that's what I get from parents the most. It's going to be like, it's going to set you back $3,000. But the thing is, college is about $50,000 a year. Getting into a good school, there's scholarships. that an SAT can open the door to scholarships and merit aid, and which can significantly reduce the cost of the $50,000 a year. So that $3,000, comes back and pays back in spades if you, do well on your SAT. And, I wouldn't have been in this for 17 years if it didn't work. I would be out, flipping pizzas right now. Not to say that that's a bad profession, but test prep does work.
Right.
That's why you want to do it. You want the strategies and going into the test, learning test taking strategies like plugging in, into the variables for math problems or back solving into the word problems. Knowing those like little tricks and shortcuts can save you a lot of time, so you can answer the medium and hard level questions and finish the sections on time, and just ultimately leads to a better score.
Right. So if we're trying to explore our options, what would your advice be? If we just did that practice test at home and we got a score, and we're saying, based on what we're thinking about, we'd like to have a better score. So our next step is some sort of prep or tutor or course or online or book, or what are the choices of resources, and how do you choose between them?
You can do a self-study at home, which is going to take quite a bit of self-discipline. So if you're kind of a student who's just really independent and organized, then you can totally do this on your own. And I would have your parents with the stopwatch Saturday morning have you watch you take a practice test. That's one way to do it. You can have a tutor help you. Just make sure it's an experienced tutor. Now you can either do like a group tutoring course type situation, like with a Kaplan, where you're going to be probably with about 6 to 10 other students, hopefully around your level, baseline level, so that you're all kind of achieving the same goal, which is to improve. Go from like say a 600 to a 700. It can be a very good way to learn, a group class, but just make sure that the students are at your level, and it will save you money as well. I mean, those group situations tend to be pretty cost effective. But then again, sometimes the group can be very distracting, and the instructor won't be able to answer your individual questions all the time. That's where it leads to another option, which is one-on-one tutoring, and that's what we do. Having somebody, experienced, knowledgeable tutor sit down with you and work with, and custom design your program to fit your particular needs. So he'll look at your baseline score, as you mentioned, look at the weaknesses and what you really need to work on, and basically incorporate strategies to help you overcome your pitfalls, with the grammar, or say, you have, critical reading issues, those need to be addressed right away. If it's like a 10-session program, definitely want to take care of those in the first 3-4 sessions, and just kind of keeping track of how you're doing, keeping track of the metrics session by session. So that's another way to learn. And now we didn't even talk about location. I mean, you can work with somebody, at, in your state, in your town. Hopefully you have somebody good who can work with you. But if not, there's online tutoring. You can work with somebody on Skype on an online whiteboard. You can see and hear each other well. You can look at a whiteboard together and do math problems together. I mean, there's fabulous tutors all over the world. Again, just make sure that you screen your tutor very carefully. Make sure that tutor is excellent with the test, can ace them himself, and has a lot of experience and just a really good personality, positive, kind of keep you moving, because it's not the most exciting stuff doing ACT and SAT work. So you got to keep it kind of positive and uplifting.
All right. Well, another thing that we were chatting about earlier is some of the things that the test makers don't tell us about what's going on kind of behind the scenes. I mean, obviously one of the biggest issues is ACT, SAT is big business, right? They make millions of dollars charging people to take the tests over and over. And obviously then the companies get involved. And so there's a lot of money changing hands. But what else is going on out there that most people probably wouldn't know?
Well, one is that, I mean, I've seen it myself, but, with a lot of practice and learning valuable test taking strategies, you can not only improve your test score, but you can learn to master the test. For example, like I mentioned before, I had a student who took the test 5 times, and after super scoring the results, he improved close to 500 points and got into Brown University. Another thing is that the essay graders, they spend no more than several minutes reading and grading your essay. These SAT graders are paid by the hour. They have to go through each student, so they don't have time to look through your essay carefully. So they do a masterful job glancing through hundreds of essays. So it's critical that you make a good first impression and take care of the basics of your essay, such as keeping it neat. Make sure it's neat, legible handwriting. Having a good structure, 3 to 5 indented paragraphs, like an intro, conclusion. If you don't have a conclusion, you're going to get penalized right away. So at least write a sentence down if you're, running out of time, and then make sure the length is good. It's proven that the longer the essay, the better. If you just write, like, say, a page, it doesn't look good. It's not a good first impression. So just take care of those basics. And, from my experience so far, just kind of looking at what I've seen, I find that the SAT seems to be maybe a little harder of a test than the ACT in the reading. The reading portion of the SAT really requires you to, answer a lot of inference questions. So if you have a hard time reading behind the lines, between the lines, you might struggle a little bit with that SAT. It really requires you to do a little bit more critical thinking than a more straightforward ACT reading. And then finally, one thing that they don't really want you to know is that, and they do make millions, so they want you to take these tests, but just keep in mind that the SAT and ACT, it's proven, they won't predict how successful you'll be in life. And let me explain what that means. Okay, so the SAT or ACT score might get you into a better college on paper. Okay, we all know that. But a Gallup poll of nearly 30,000 college graduates last year found that the percentage of students who are engaged with their work and thriving in all aspects of their lives did not vary based on whether the graduates went to a public or private 4-year college. So, for example, like, I have students who got decent test scores, like not bad ones, not amazing ones, but they got really solid test scores. And they didn't get into the top college, but they're doing amazing now. They got into a good college with solid programs. They maximize their time while they're there, which is key, by the way. It's how you utilize your time in college. And now they're young adults running their own businesses, and they're making a lot of money.
Yeah, I would agree with that there is, especially in some situations in some families where you're so focused on that top school that anything less gets labeled failure almost. And for most kids, it's not where you go to school. It's a lot more on what you do when you're there, and, the contacts you make and the willingness for you to step out of bounds and do things that other kids won't do.
Yes.
It is not automatically you're going to do better because you went to this school or that school. And
yeah, absolutely.
Put things back into perspective. Yes, the testing is important and grades are important, but there's more to life than, again, getting into that name brand school.
Yeah, and not everybody can. And you might get straight A's and get rejected at Harvard. So just don't give up. There's lots of great schools out there for you. The ACT and SAT is just one portion of the whole package that you're using for schools. It's an important one, but just do a good job kicking butt while you're at college. That's really important.
Right. So you mentioned the writing section, and it just dawned on me that I don't know a lot about the writing section because when I was going off to college, writing sections didn't exist. And for most parents out there, they probably don't know a lot about the writing sections. So can you explain what the writing sections are as far as how they work? Obviously you write an essay, but where do you write it? Do you write it by hand? Do you?
Yeah. Both essays are now are optional. So the ACT essay will come at the end, and the SAT essay is the last section as well of the exam. They're both optional tests. You write them by hand. They give you about 3 pages of lined paper. And unless you have a special accommodation, and sometimes they let you type them. And the ACT essay asks you to evaluate multiple perspectives. So quite a bit of, cross-analyzation. And the SAT essay asks you to critique an author's persuasive essay. So, I tell students that, if you are a good writer and you want to showcase your writing, opt to take the essay portion. But if you feel like, your writing is, little to be desired, a lot to be desired, then just opt to not take it.
Right.
But if you're applying to competitive schools, they want to see that essay too, by the way.
Right. So, and yeah, a lot of colleges are going to require it, so you have no choice, but not all do, of course. So then, how long do you have to work on this essay?
The SAT essay is going to be a 40-minute affair, and the ACT essay is 50 minutes.
Okay. When you're coaching someone to figure this out, would they like use a piece of that paper to write some sort of outline and then think it through and then spend, and then write it for 20 minutes? Or how do you do that kind of thing? I can't imagine writing things by hand, because I think most kids, especially, their handwriting isn't all that good because, we don't even take handwriting in school anymore. You start with keyboarding at second grade and
Right.
they don't teach you how to write effectively anymore. So
Right.
how do you deal with, messy papers and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So what you do, well, first of all, let me just clarify. The SAT essay is 50 minutes. The ACT is 40. So I might have flip flopped that, but
Okay.
just double check. But yeah, what you really need to do is, if they give you 50 minutes on the SAT essay, you have to learn how to outline and come up with a game plan of how you're going to use those 50 minutes. I mean, if you just jump right into the writing, you might get lost. So you want to spend 2 to 3 minutes making sure you understand the topic, decide whether you're going to defend or attack it. You have to pick one stance. You can't flip-flop.
Mm-hmm.
That looks a little weak. Usually what I tell students is decide the decision whether to defend or attack something depends on how many more examples you have on one side of the fence over another. If you have more tangible examples, then choose that stance. So another thing you want to do is you want to brainstorm some potential examples for your essay for 2 to 3 minutes. And then you have to write out a little outline for about 4 minutes. A simple list of ideas will do, which include what your game plan is for each paragraph. And then you spend about 35 minutes writing the essay. You're ready. And what you do is you just keep it neat and focused. If you basically do the first 3 steps, you'll probably end up writing neater anyway. Otherwise, you're going to be erasing a lot if you don't have a game plan. And then what you want to do is have 5 minutes to, proofread your essay, make sure everything looks sharp. And, you're going to be writing with pencil, so you can use an eraser and you can erase and just make it neat that way. What I suggest, a take-home tip is just make sure that you do an awful amount of practice. And if you're used to just, typing essays, as part of that, Saturday morning at home, taking a full practice test, part of that's going to be taking, with your sharpened number 2 pencil and doing an essay.
Right. I just thinking about my kids, and they're relatively young still. So my oldest is 13, but
Okay.
I can't imagine him writing a legible paragraph at this point. He can type a legible paragraph pretty good, but I can't imagine him writing one. And what about spelling? Does spelling count?
Spelling counts. I mean, again, they're glancing at these essays. So if you have, if you're misspelling like a key word that you're repeating over and over again, that's a red flag. I think they'll probably give you 1 or 2 passes, especially if you're trying like a really hard word. But yeah, spelling does count. I mean, it's part of that first impression that you just want to make a good impression. And what I tell students is, if you can't spell something and you're not confident, find a synonym of a word that you know how to spell. That's how you get away with that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that would be examples of strategy where if you have a tool belt full of strategies, then when you get there, you're not struggling as much. You know what to do and you just get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So great. Well, that's been very enlightening as far as all the test prep ideas, etc. If people want to learn more about what you do and where you do it, how can they get a hold of you?
2 ways. Just go to preppedandpolished.com. I own the company. I'll get back to you. So it's preppedandpolished.com. And then if you want to get some really good test prep tips, I do a weekly podcast called the Prepped and Polished Podcast. I have over 100 episodes. preppedandpolished.com/podcast.
Great. So there's another podcast out there.
Yeah, but I didn't give up.
All right. That's good. All right. Well, it was a great talking with you, and we'll stay in touch.
You too, Brad. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. All right. That's all we have for today. I appreciate you guys listening. As always, if you want to get more information, you can go to our website at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. This particular episode is episode number 79. So you can get show notes with all the links and all the various things that we talked about are available there. There's also a number of other episodes available. Obviously, this is our 79th episode. The back catalog is there as well, so you can listen to all the other 78 episodes if you would like. That's all we have for today. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns two companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.